Hi, I'm Rob from B&H, and in this video we're checking out a new DAW for Windows, Mac OS X, and Linux called Bitwig Studio. If you're familiar with Bitwig, you may have heard that it bears a lot of similarities with Ableton Live, and that's very true. Some of the developers of Bitwig had been working for Ableton, so it's no surprise that Bitwig borrows a lot of its core concepts from Live, specifically the idea of a clip-based approach to music making. How does Bitwig stack up against Live or other DAWs for that matter? Quite well, actually. Bitwig offers a lot of modulation and sound tweaking possibilities, an intuitive workflow, very detailed editing functions, and an assortment of solid plugins. There's much more to Bitwig than we have time to cover, but in this video, I'm going to try and hit some of the highlights for you. First of all, Bitwig is a fully functioning digital audio workstation, and as such allows you to record and edit audio and MIDI data in a multi-track environment. We tried version 1.08 out on a late 2013 MacBook Pro using both the Mac's built-in sound engine as well as an RME babyface interface, and it worked very nicely, although there were one or two very minor visual bugs. While generally quite stable, Bitwig did crash on me in one instance while I was playing notes and changing patches on its polysynth virtual instrument. Bitwig offers unlimited audio, MIDI, and effects tracks and features its own proprietary instruments and effects, and will also run third-party VST instruments and effects as well. I ran plugins from Waves, Universal Audio, and Native Instruments in Bitwig, and they all worked perfectly. 32 to 64-bit bridging is built in, and it also offers a feature called Sandboxing, so that if a VST plugin crashes, the failure will be isolated to the plugin only without crashing the rest of the program. At the moment, Bitwig doesn't offer support for audio unit plugins, but that very well may change in future updates. Bitwig really offers two sequencers, an arranger and a clip launcher. If you're familiar with Ableton Live, this is going to be very familiar to you. The arrangement page is fairly traditional DAW stuff. Audio and MIDI events happen on a linear timeline with automation lanes for volume, panning, effects, etc. It's basically where you lock down the final arrangement of your track. The clip launcher, on the other hand, allows you to jam and experiment with audio and MIDI clips on the fly for live performance and to experiment with arrangement ideas. Now, just to be clear, clips are basically building blocks of sound at varying lengths that can be looped, again, either MIDI triggers or audio files. I can trigger this 4-bar drum loop on another track. I've got a 4-bar hi-hat loop and another drum loop on a third track. Those are MIDI and audio clips, and Bitwig's default mode will automatically stretch the audio to lock to the master tempo. A bit different from Live, though, is the fact that an audio clip can also have multiple samples in it from different sources, which is a neat feature and quite useful for loop creation. This bass line is a MIDI clip triggering the massive plugin from Native Instruments. Clips can be grouped together as scenes, so you can have a chorus scene or a verse scene, or maybe a build scene or drop scene, depending on the music you're making. Like Live, Bitwig allows you to record the moves you make in the clip launcher to the arranger page, which is a really fun and intuitive way to come up with basic arrangement ideas. You can then go back and edit in more detail and add additional automation and other touches if needed, or experiment with launching additional clips over the arrangement. You can also drag clips from the launcher to the arrangement timeline. If you're not used to Ableton Live, it can get a little confusing at first moving between playing the arrangement and launching clips. Useful in that regard is this row of icons in the clip launcher window that tells each of the tracks to revert from the clip launcher to the arrangement page, and there's a global toggle for all the tracks next to the scenes at the top. In addition to being available in the arranger page, the clip launcher is also available in the mix page, which is a good way to use the program in a live performance situation. Bitwig's ability to have the clip launcher in both the arrange and mix windows is a bit more elegant than the second window option in Live, especially for users limited to only one screen. I should mention that Bitwig offers support for up to 3 monitors at once, although I didn't personally test that feature. Bitwig also allows you to put MIDI and audio on the same track. This is called a hybrid track, and it opens up a number of possibilities. On this bass line, for example, I put the MIDI clip in the arranger, bounce the clip there, and then reverse reversed the last few notes, which is obviously not something you can do with MIDI triggers. I love the idea of being able to easily bounce out a clip in place rather than the entire audio track and drop it right where I want it in the arrangement. It's very convenient. Bitwig offers all the deep editing and automation functions you'd expect from a professional DAW, and a lot of that information can be accessed through the inspector and detail editor panels. The inspector can be used to see at a glance and alter detailed info about either a clip or a track or an audio event or a MIDI note event, so that actually makes it a really helpful and actually critical editing tool. In this section of the track, I wanted to leave the loop the same length, but mute the second stab, and an easy way I found to do that was to highlight that audio file and simply mute it in the inspector menu. The editor window shows up at the bottom for detailed, extensive editing of MIDI notes and audio clips. All the time stretching and audio editing functions we're used to seeing in professional DAWs are here, and Bitwig's slicing up of audio using onsets works quite nicely to fine-tune loops. On the MIDI side of things, Bitwig allows individual note modulation on its proprietary instrument plugins, which is sort of like automating individual notes. This means individual notes can have their own panning changes, for example, or you can custom program timbre expressions so a certain note could trigger a filter change or oscillator detuning. There are a lot of options here. Bitwig also features layered editing. This allows you to edit MIDI notes on multiple tracks on the same editor panel, which is really convenient for seeing how the various parts are playing together. You can also look at audio tracks in the background on the panel to get a visual idea of how your MIDI notes and samples are working together, although you can't edit the audio when you do this, only the MIDI notes. Bitwig also features Histogram Editing, which is a graphic tool that allows you to change some of the parameter values in the inspector. In this example, taken directly from the manual, I'm using the histogram to dial in random pitch changes on this percussion loop. You can also use it for panning and gain changes, or of course MIDI note editing as well. It's a good way to dial in just the right amount of randomness to give tracks a less mechanical feeling. Bitwig works a little differently in terms of its plug-in implementation system. Virtual instruments and plug-in effects can be instantiated in normal effect chains just like any other DAW, but we also have containers and devices that we can work with. That's a little confusing at first, but basically a device in Bitwig can be a traditional audio effect, like a reverb plugin or the polysynth instrument, but there are other kinds of devices like containers that host plugins or modulators that can modulate plugins in the effect chain. So for example, Bitwig has a device called a sampler, but it also has a device that's a container called drum machine. You could think of the drum machine container as a host for a bunch of little samplers and sound generators organized to play back percussion sounds in a kit or group. It's worth noting that the drum machine container has 119 different drum kits to choose from. Interestingly though, the drum machine isn't limited to playing samples. So for example, if I look inside the Berlin 301-2 kit, I can see that each drum cell in this particular kit is a sampler playing back an audio file with filter and envelope functions available. But let's say I want to replace the snare sample in this cell. In fact, I don't even want to use the sampler. I want to use this cell to trigger Bitwig's electronic clap instrument. No problem. I find the E clap under Instruments. Let's try the classic Fat Clap preset, and I'll just drag that to the cell I want, and voila, the cell is triggering the E clap, while the rest of the cells are still triggering sampling instruments. Even more interesting are containers that work with effect plugins. The Multiband Effects 2 container splits the audio signal at an adjustable frequency and then routes the lows to one effect and the highs to another. In this case, I have the highs going to a stereo delay while the lows go to a ladder filter. The mid-side split container is similar but routes the center audio to one effect and the side info to another. Another cool feature about Bitwig's plugin effects is the ability to drag and drop effects into the feedback loop or wet part of the effect only. So as a simple example, I can put a flanger only on the delay's feedback circuit or only on the wet signal from the reverb and leave the original signal dry. Now of course I could manually set up an aux send to do the same thing, but having this kind of control on a track insert can be a lot easier and time-saving during a mix. Bitwig offers what it calls the Unified Modulation System, and that allows you to modulate parameters from one effect to another. So for example, I can have an LFO in my synth also modulate a parameter in an effect in the chain, as long as, and this is important to remember, the effect is nested, in this case inside the synth plugin. Nesting effects inside containers and devices opens up a plethora of modulation and programming options with instrument and effect chains. This works for VST plugins also, and with macro effect knobs as well. So these macro knobs in my synth modulate parameters in both the synth itself, like filter settings and oscillator FM amounts, but they can also control the amount of my delay effect, which is a totally separate plugin. And the fourth knob is controlling the resonance and the frequency envelope modulation on Driver, a VST plugin from Native Instruments. You can also set the range that the mod source will have on the parameter for very detailed control. And of course, you can assign those macro controls to knobs on a keyboard or controller to give you hands-on, real-time control over multiple effects for live performance. Bitwig also features the Open Controller API, meaning that users can write scripts for all kinds of different controllers, so we should start seeing more and more of those online in the near future. Bitwig is also promising quite advanced online collaborative possibilities, meaning multiple computers running the same document. Since Bitwig is so derivative of Ableton Live, that's the obvious basis of comparison, and both are excellent DAWs. Live is available in different tiers for different price points, while at this point Bitwig sells as a one-size-fits-all package that does come with a number of very good devices that include really useful, everyday stuff like reverbs, compressors, and the usual sort of stuff any professional DAW package offers. The sampler, the polysynth device, and the FM synth device are all solid-sounding plugins as well. The built-in reverb sounds good and offers a good assortment of parameters, and I also got quite reasonable results from tweaking the presets in the compressor on some drum loops. Having said that, because it hasn't been around long, it doesn't offer all the bells and whistles that Live Suite has, like Max for Live, for example. At the moment, though, Suite does cost more, and Bitwig's forthcoming integrated modular system appears to be the equivalent of Max for Live's visual programming language. On the other hand, Bitwig offers an excellent workflow and a lot of deep programming possibilities with its nested effect chains, unified modulation system, and comprehensive editing features. With all that, the sound tweaking potential in it is very exciting. I really just scratched the surface in this video. Also, if it comes through on its promises the way I'm hoping it will in terms of collaborative features, Bitwig Studio could be a true game changer. I'm Rob from B&H, and thanks for watching.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.